In the previous lesson, we learned what a monopoly was. And now, in the second part of this module, we turn our attention to what monopolists actually do. You've learned that in a perfectly competitive market, the price is determined by supply and demand. Recall also that the firms in a perfectly competitive market are price takers, because there is an equilibrium price that no firm can influence by its individual actions. The demand curve for an individual firm in a perfectly competitive market is simply a horizontal line at the equilibrium price. If a firm in such a market asked for more than the equilibrium price, its customers would switch to buying from competitors, since they sell identical products, and there's no reason to pay more for something that's identical. And a firm in a perfectly competitive market can sell as much as it wants at the equilibrium price, so it has no reason to charge less than the equilibrium price. That would be foolish. A monopolist, however, is different. They have no competitors. Anyone who wants to buy the monopolist product must buy it from the monopolist. This advantage affects the monopolist's behavior. Because it does not face competition, the monopolist has the power to raise its price without necessarily losing all its customers, like would be the case if they were in a perfectly competitive market. This power is limited by what consumers are willing and able to pay, of course. So if the product is something people need or want very much, people may be willing to pay a very high price. A monopolist may also choose to lower its price in order to attract more customers. The monopolist's power to set the price means the monopolist is a price maker. A monopolist is interested in choosing the combination of price and quantity that will maximize its profit. It does so, recognizing that the demand for the monopolist product is the entire market demand. According to the law of demand, a higher price causes customers to buy less of the product. So a monopolist faces a trade-off. If it raises its price, it will lose some sales. There is also a trade-off if a monopolist wants to sell more of its product. It must lower its price. Suppose the software development industry is monopolized by a firm called Monopoly, like we see in the table here. This table shows a revenue and cost schedule for this fictional firm. Monopoly can produce up to 8 units of a computer operating system called window shade. Now, the fixed cost of Monopoly's operation is $5. And we see that price reflected here, $5. So we'll write that here, and that equals fixed cost. The marginal cost, the cost of producing an additional unit of window shade, is $3, and we see that represented right here. Monopoly sells window shade to all its customers for the same price, which is chosen to maximize profit, as explained in the next section. Now, the total revenue that Monopoly receives is the price times the quantity. And that is reported right here in column 3. For example, the total revenue received by Monopoly, if 3 units are produced and sold at a particular price, let's erase the screen now and look at this. If the total revenue received by Monopoly, if 3 units are produced and sold, that's right here, at a price of $7, right here, the total revenue would be $21. Because it is a monopoly, the demand for Monopoly's product is the market demand curve, which is downward sloping. Whenever a firm faces a downward sloping demand curve, it must lower its price to sell more. So Monopoly must lower the price of window shade if it wants to sell more units. In Module 15, we explained that marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue a firm receives when it sells more unit of output. Comparing columns 2 and 4 in this table, we see that after the first unit is sold, rather, I'm sorry, let me go back there. If we compare columns 2 and 4, we see that after the first unit, the marginal revenue for a monopoly, right here, is less, get back into drawing mode again, the marginal revenue of $7 is less than the price of $8. This is because when Monopoly lowers its price to sell another unit, the change in total revenue is not simply the price it receives for that last unit like it was with a perfectly competitive firm. Instead, it is the price minus the decrease in revenue on all the other units that could be sold for more if the price were not lowered to sell the last unit. For example, to sell the second unit, Monopoly must lower its price from $9 to $8. Its marginal revenue from selling the second unit is not, for example, to sell the second unit, Monopoly must lower its price from $9 to $8. Its marginal revenue from selling the second unit is the new price of $8 minus the dollar it loses on the first unit by lowering the price from $9 to $8. So marginal revenue would be $8 minus $1, and that would equal $7. A monopolist, like other types of firms, is interested in maximizing profit, not revenue. Monopoly's profit is reported here in column 7. To find profit in this case, we started with total revenue, subtracted the fixed cost of $5, and subtracted the marginal cost of each of the units produced. By comparing the profit numbers in the table, you can see that Monopoly maximizes its profit by producing either 3 or 4 units, where the profit is greatest at $7. But what if you didn't have a nice table telling you the profit for each quantity? The same marginal analysis that Blade Runner used to maximize profit in the perfectly competitive market described in Module 15 applies to other types of markets as well. Any type of firm can maximize profit by producing up to the quantity at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That is also true for a monopoly. If they are never equal, it will produce the largest quantity for which the marginal revenue exceeds the marginal cost. Employing this marginal analysis, Monopoly would produce 4 units, which we know to be a profit-maximizing quantity of output. Maximizing profit isn't all about choosing the right quantity. The monopolist must also choose the right price. Fortunately, that's even easier than choosing the right quantity. To maximize profit, the monopoly chooses the highest price at which it can sell the profit-maximizing quantity. The first 2 columns in this table provide a demand schedule, right there, of the quantity that would be sold at each price. We can see that the highest price at which 4 units would be sold would be $6. We can review the profit-maximizing practices of monopolist with the aid of this figure right here. To maximize profit, a monopolist chooses the quantity of output at which the marginal cost of production is equal to the marginal revenue gained from selling another unit. We have drawn the marginal cost curve as a flat line. That's consistent with the assumption that the marginal cost is $3 regardless of how much output is actually produced. For other monopolists, the marginal cost curve could be rising or falling, and it often resembles a Nike swoosh that might look something like that. To simplify the situation, we'll assume that software can only be sold in whole units. So the lines between the dots in this figure are just connectors that don't represent options to sell partial units of window shade. Marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal at a quantity of 4 units. Right there. This equality marks the profit-maximizing quantity of output. To find the highest price Monopoly can charge for 4 units, we look at the height of the demand curve at 4 units. This is the demand curve. And we go up to the height, and we can see at that price, if we follow the dashed line over to the y-axis, up from a quantity of 4 to the demand curve, and then left from the demand curve to the vertical axis, we find the profit-maximizing price of $6. Now, you may have noticed that we did not mention a supply curve in discussing how price and quantity are determined in a market controlled by a monopolist. This is because the quantity supplied by a monopolist depends on more than the price. It also depends on the demand curve. Under the same cost conditions, 2 monopolists with different demand curves would supply different quantities. As price makers, rather than price takers, monopolists will charge more for a given quantity if the demand is high than if the demand is low. Thus, it is impossible to use a supply curve to determine the quantity a monopolist would supply at each price.